The pen weighed for grams. It cost $11 from a stationery jobber in Queens. It was, at 9:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, the only thing standing between Nora Vance and the bottom of the East River. 3 men filled a room built for one clerk and a counter of dead men's watches. The air smelled of gun oil and cedar cologne, applied too generously, the way men do when they want a room to remember them. A confession sat on the counter, one page, still warm from a laser printer 2 blocks away. A hand, not her hand, was supposed to sign it. "Sign it," the big one said. 3rd time. She looked at the signature already forged at the bottom, the one they wanted her to match, to make her own hand disappear inside it like a coat into a closet. She didn't sign it. She smiled, small and tired, the smile of someone who has spent 9 years staring at other people's handwriting for a living, and said the 4 words that made a very dangerous man go very quiet. "Whoever forged this stutters." It wasn't a good smile. It was the only one she had left in her that night. Rewind 11 days. The buy right pawn and loan on Knapp Street smelled like machine oil, wet cardboard, and the ghost of somebody's grandmother's perfume trapped inside a velvet ring box nobody would ever reclaim. Nora Vance smelled it before she saw it, every morning, the way you smell your own house without noticing you're smelling anything at all. 6:40 a.m. bus 84, the one that skipped the Fillmore stop on weekends for no reason anyone had ever explained, dropped her 3 blocks short and she walked the rest with her collar up, breath fogging, the cold finding the seam where her left boot had come unglued at the toe for the 2nd time that winter. She was 31 and her knees already announced weather before the weather arrived, a dull ache behind the left kneecap that told her rain 12 hours out, better than the app on her phone ever managed. Her boots were resoled twice, the left one crookedly, by a man on Avenue J who charged $8 and did not apologize for the crookedness. Her coat was a man's coat, grey wool, bought used at a church rummage sale for $6, 2 sizes too big on purpose so it would fit for years instead of one winter. She kept her nails cut short and unpainted, not from taste but because chip polish looked worse than none, and none was free. She was $340 short for rent. Not $400. Not $350. $340, a number she had recalculated so many times it had stopped being math and become a kind of prayer, said under her breath while she stocked the case, restrung a guitar's missing E, weighed a Krugerrand on a scale that hadn't been recertified since the previous owner died. Monday. A woman came in wanting $40 for a wedding ring, 18 carat, her hand shaking so hard the ring nearly slid off the counter twice before Nora could weigh it. Nora gave her 60, out of the register, out of a rule Sol had taught her that had no name and no line item and would have made Barry in Scottsdale furious if he ever noticed the discrepancy in a spreadsheet he'd never actually open. Tuesday. A man in a Con Edison jacket tried to pawn a nail gun still warm from a job site 2 blocks over, no paperwork, eyes doing the thing eyes do when a story's being built in real time behind them. Nora said no. He called her a word she didn't repeat even in her own head, and left, and she stood there a full minute afterward with her pulse in her ears before the bell over the door stopped ringing. Wednesday, a slow day, she ate a granola bar for lunch that had gone soft in the wrapper and counted, twice, the $26 in the tip jar Sol used to keep by the register for the shoeshine man who worked the corner, because the shoeshine man hadn't been by in 3 weeks and Nora had started to worry, quietly, the way you worry about people whose last names you don't know. She had a dog. Mochi, a 14-pound terrier mix with one ear that never stood upright, rescued off Knapp Street itself 2 winters back, half-starved, missing a canine tooth from some fight she'd lost before Nora found her curled behind a dumpster in a February that hit 4 degrees 3 nights running. Mochi ate the off-brand kibble from the dented can bin at the discount grocery, not because Nora didn't love her, but because the good bag was $6 more, and $6, this month, was a bus fare and a half, or 4 days of the good creamer instead of the powdered kind that never fully dissolved. Deb from the diner next door called her furniture with a heartbeat, not unkindly, the day Nora stood behind the counter for 6 hours without a single customer speaking a full sentence to her. Point at the case. Nod at the price. Slide the cash. Nobody in that neighborhood looked at the woman behind pawnshop glass like she was a person who went home and microwaved rice for dinner because the stove's front burner had stopped lighting in November and the landlord's idea of urgent was 6 weeks and a form filled out in triplicate. Sol Adelman had run by Wright for 41 years and taught Nora everything about spotting a fake, a Rolex crown that spun a half-turn too loose, a diamond that scratched glass but not another diamond, a signature that leaned right when the man was left-handed his whole documented life. Sol died on a Sunday in March, quietly, the way he'd done most things, heart just stopping between one customer and the next, and left the shop to his nephew Barry, who lived in Scottsdale and communicated exclusively through a property management company that answered emails 11 days late and always in the passive voice. Mistakes were regretted, delays were acknowledged, nobody was ever named as having done anything. Barry didn't know Nora's last name. Barry knew she'd kept the shop from bleeding out for 4 months on a salary that hadn't moved since Sol was alive to set it, $14.50 an hour, no raise, no benefits, a single sick day used in March for the funeral itself. Thursday, the landlord's assistant left a yellow notice taped to Nora's apartment door, not an eviction, not yet, just a reminder wrapped in enough legal language to feel like a threat anyway. Nora read it standing in the hallway that smelled of somebody's fried onions and somebody else's cigarette smoke, and did the math again. $340. 11 days. Friday, a regular came in, Mr. Okafor, 71, retired transit worker, pawning the same gold pocket watch he'd pawned and reclaimed 11 times in 3 years, a ritual neither of them ever named out loud. He always apologized for the smell of his cigarettes on the velvet box. Nora always told him not to worry about it, and meant it, and gave him $4 more than the watch was strictly worth, out of the same nameless rule that had covered the woman with the wedding ring, because some math didn't belong in a spreadsheet, and Sol had taught her that too, the same week he taught her to spot a stuttering signature. That night, home by 8, she microwaved rice and ate it standing at the counter because sitting felt like admitting the day had beaten her, and it hadn't, quite, not yet. Mochi circled twice and settled against her foot, warm, 12 pounds of unqualified loyalty, and Nora scratched behind the bad ear and said, out loud, to an empty apartment that smelled faintly, tonight, of boiled feathers from 4 blocks over, we're fine. We're gonna be fine, the way you say a thing to make it true by saying it. She wasn't fine. She had 11 days and $340 of daylight between fine and not fine, and she went to sleep doing math in her head instead of counting anything as gentle as sheep. Saturday she picked up a second shift at the diner next door, 6 hours on her feet after already closing the shop, carrying plates for Deb who'd thrown her a bone the way you throw a bone to somebody you like and can't otherwise help. Tips came to $31, mostly in ones, smelling faintly of syrup and somebody's spilled coffee, and she counted it twice on the walk to the bus stop, the way she counted everything twice now, as if a number might change if she looked at it hard enough a second time. Sunday she didn't work at all, and the stillness of it, no counter, no register, no bell over a door, felt less like rest and more like a held breath, the kind of quiet that comes right before something, though she couldn't have said, that particular Sunday, before what. Tuesday 6:58 p.m., a different Tuesday, the one that mattered. Nora was locking the gate when the black Escalade parked crooked across 2 spots like the street belonged to it. She didn't look up right away. You learn, in a shop like that, not to look up right away. 3 miles south and 40 minutes earlier, Dmitry Volkov, Kessler's accountant, had disappeared. Not died. Disappeared, which in Kessler's world was worse, because dead men couldn't testify and missing men absolutely could, the moment the FBI's Eastern District Task Force found them first. Kessler ran what people who feared him called logistics and what a federal indictment, still sealed but leaking at the edges like a bad pipe, called a racketeering enterprise moving stolen goods, laundered cash, and, anew, this year, and this was the part that made Kessler's stomach fold in on itself in a way nothing had in a decade, 3 semi-automatic rifles that had crossed a state line in the false bottom of a produce truck. 11:42 p.m. 6 hours until Kessler's own lawyer needed a signed, notarized statement putting the guns, the truck, and the missing accountant's fingerprints on a man named Piotr Bosco, a nobody, a driver, a man who did not exist to anyone except as a name typed once on a truck manifest. 6 hours and 18 minutes, to be exact, until the federal grand jury reconvened at 6 a.m. sharp, a scheduling quirk nobody had bothered to explain and nobody had dared ask about. The confession existed. It had existed for 2 hours, typed, worded, damning, every sentence built by a lawyer who charged $900 an hour and had never once, in 14 years, asked Kessler a question he didn't already know the diplomatic answer to. What it did not have, could not have, because Piotr Bosko was currently 3 states away and unreachable and possibly already dead by somebody else's hand entirely, was a signature that would survive a forensic document examiner's loupe under fluorescent federal lighting. Kessler did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. The men who worked for him agreed, privately, over cigarettes in alleys where nobody could hear them agree, that a raised voice from Kessler would almost be a relief, because it would mean the anger had somewhere to go, some pressure valve, some human weather pattern they could read and plan around. What Kessler did instead was go still. He'd gone still in the back office of a shuttered dry cleaner on Avenue U, for fluorescent tubes overhead, one of them buzzing on the edge of dying, and the 4 men in the room with him had each found somewhere else to look, the water-stained ceiling tile, the toe of their own shoe, the flickering light that buzzed like it wanted to say something and thought better of it. Yuri Kessler, no relation to Dimitri beyond the surname their grandfathers had shared before a border crossing and a falling out neither living man fully understood, had been the accountant's cover name for 11 months, a small vanity Dimitri had allowed because family, even distant, even barely family, meant something to him that his enemies mistook for weakness. The task force didn't know that yet. Dimitri intended to keep it that way for exactly 6 hours and 18 minutes. "He'll turn," said a second man, Pavel, thin, new enough to the crew that he still flinched at silences. "Yuri. If they've got him, he'll turn." "He won't," Dimitri said, and something in the flatness of it made Pavel wish, visibly, that he'd said nothing at all. He's not disappeared because he ran. He's disappeared because someone wanted him gone before he could talk to either side. Someone inside this room, maybe. Someone who knew his route. Nobody spoke. The fluorescent tube buzzed. "Find someone," Kessler said, "who can make a hand look like Piotr's hand." Silence beat. Nobody moved. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and stopped. "I have a name," said Anton, the big one, the one whose knuckles carried a permanent split scar from a door that hadn't opened fast enough for years back. "Pawnshop girl. Knapp Street. Old man used her for appraisals, insurance fraud stuff, signature verification, before he died. She can go both ways. Spot a fake. Make one, if she had to." Kessler's cologne, cedar, expensive, a full ounce of it that cost more than Nora's monthly gas bill, moved through the room ahead of him whenever he walked, so that people 2 rooms away sometimes straightened their posture before they'd consciously registered why. He hadn't moved from the doorway of his own office. For men, and none of them had looked directly at him in 90 seconds. "Bring her," Kessler said. Gently. Gently, from Anton, meant the Escalade parked crooked, meant 3 men filling a doorway built for 1, meant a folder slapped down on the counter at 9:04 p.m. with a photocopy of Nora's lease, her mother's address in Bayonne, and a Polaroid of Mochi taken through the pawnshop's own front window 40 minutes earlier, proof they'd been watching long enough to know the dog's name from the tag. She didn't scream. Screaming was a luxury for people who thought someone was coming. "Sit," Anton said. "She Saturday." The confession went down on the counter, face up, the forged signature already inked at the bottom in a shaky, unpracticed hand that even from 4 feet away made something in Nora's chest go tight and cold and, underneath the fear, faintly, unmistakably, professionally offended. "You're gonna make it match," Anton said. "You're gonna practice it, and then you're gonna sign a clean one, and then you're gonna forget this room exists." 11:56 p.m. 6 hours, 4 minutes. "Sign it," Anton said. First time. Nora's hands, flat on the counter, had gone the particular cold that has nothing to do with the shop's broken thermostat. Her pulse hammered high in her throat, a small frantic drum she could feel behind her own ears, could hear almost, in the ringing silence between the ice machine's cycles. She looked at the signature. She looked at it the way she'd looked at 10,000 signatures across 9 years, pawn checks, hocked bonds, the backs of guitars supposedly signed by musicians who'd never touched them, the loan applications of men who swore up and down the watch had belonged to their grandfather. The letter P leaned left. The rest of the name leaned right. "Sign it," Anton said. Second time. A man does not write his own name with two different postures in one word. A forger, copying from a photograph, working fast under pressure, does. And there, right where the T crossed into the O, a tremor. A hitch. A hand that had stopped, restarted, stopped again, the ink pooling a half shade darker at the restart the way ink always does when a pen sits still on paper a beat too long. She had seen that hitch before. Sol used to call it a stutter. Not a metaphor. A literal, physical stutter transferred from a shaking hand into ink, the same way a nervous speaker repeats a syllable before the word comes out whole. Behind Anton, in the doorway, a man in a charcoal coat had just stepped inside, Cedar arriving a half-second before he did, and every other man in the room had gone very slightly smaller in the shoulders the way rooms do around weather systems. "Sign it," Anton said. Third time. Nora looked up. Not at Anton. At the man in the doorway, because some animal part of her recognized, correctly, exactly who in that room actually owned the next 60 seconds of her life. "Whoever forged this stutters," she said. Silence beat. Long enough that the ice machine in the shop's back room, 3 feet behind her, cycled on with a clatter that made Anton flinch and Kessler not flinch at all. "What did you say?" Kessler said. "Quiet." Not a question. A demand for repetition, which she would learn, in the weeks to come, was the closest thing to a threat his voice ever made. "Your forger has a shake in his right hand," Nora said, and heard her own voice come out steadier than her actual pulse had any right to allow. "Look at the P, look at where the T meets the O. That's not a signature. That's somebody's second draft of a signature, and it'll fall apart the second a real examiner puts a loop on it under courtroom lighting. You bring this into a federal grand jury, you're not framing your driver. You're handing them a roadmap straight to the guy who actually wrote it." Nobody in the room said anything for 4 full seconds, which is a very long time to stand in a pawnshop that smells of gun oil with 3 armed men and a woman whose rent is $340 short. Dimitri Kessler, a man who had, by his own private count, silenced 11 people in 11 different rooms with 11 different kinds of quiet, found himself, for the first time in a career built on never being surprised, with absolutely nothing to say. The silence stretched. Anton looked at Kessler. Kessler looked at the confession. Kessler looked, finally, at the exhausted woman in a dead man's oversized coat who had just, calmly, under the direct threat of her own disappearance, told him his 6-hour emergency had been built on a piece of paper that would collapse in a courtroom before the clerk finished reading it aloud. "Get her a chair that isn't broken," Kessler said, to no one, to everyone. And somebody turned that ice machine off. Morning arrived with a smell Nora didn't recognize, leather upholstery, gun oil masked under pine air freshener, the particular chill of climate control set 6 degrees colder than any apartment she'd ever lived in. She'd slept for hours on a couch in a room above a shuttered dry cleaner, guarded not unkindly by a man named Gregor who'd brought her actual coffee, in an actual mug, unasked, and had apologized, quietly, for the Polaroid of the dog. Kessler found her at 7:10 a.m., Cedar arriving first, same as always. He set an envelope on the table between them. Didn't open it. Let her see the thickness. 10,000, he said. For last night. And a job, if you want one. You look at things. You tell me if they're real. Her phone buzzed once against the table between them, her mother, Bayon, the 4th ring already halfway gone. Nora silenced it without looking, a reflex 9 years deep, the same reflex that answered a bell over a shop door before her mind had caught up to what customer it belonged to. You should get that, Kessler said. For rings, you said. Last night. She'll call the shop's landline next, Nora said. It's Tuesday. I'll be there in an hour, she'll stop worrying. She didn't say that her mother didn't know she hadn't been home all night, didn't know about the Escalade or the folder with her own address photocopied inside it, and had no reason to ever find out, if Nora had anything to say about it. Nora didn't touch the envelope. "No," she said. His eyebrows moved a quarter inch, which for Kessler apparently counted as an expression of genuine astonishment. "Ten's low," he said, misreading her, the way rich men do when a woman says no and their first assumption is always the number. "It's not about the number," Nora said. "I do this and I've got a taxable income with no employer of record, no W-2, nothing I can show if the IRS ever asks where $40,000 a year suddenly came from. I lose my pawnbroker's license the second anybody connects by right to a federal racketeering case, which this obviously is, whatever euphemism you're using for it. I've got a dog, a landlord who already thinks I'm 2 months from eviction, and a mother in Bayonne who calls the shop's landline if I don't pick up my cell in 4 rings. I'm not turning down money because I'm noble. I'm turning it down because I do math for a living, and this math doesn't work." Silence beat. "You did math about my 6 hours becoming a career felony," Kessler said, "in the same 3 minutes you were deciding whether to sign a false confession that would have bought you nothing but a body bag once we didn't need you anymore." "I did math about staying alive," Nora said. "This is different math." He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look, she'd learn, that he gave ledgers before he decided whether to burn them or keep them. "Take the 10 anyway," he said. "For your silence. Not your service." She took it. Silence, unlike employment, didn't come with a tax form. He had Gregor drive her home. She didn't speak the whole ride, watching the neighborhoods change through tinted glass, brownstones giving way to chain link giving way to Knapp Street's particular gray, the chicken processing plant smokestack visible for blocks out, the way it always was, the way it had been her whole life without her ever once thinking of it as a landmark until a man in a $2,000 coat asked her, once, offhand, what that smell was. She went back to work. Back to the bus, the crooked resoled boot, the dented kibble, the rice in the microwave. Barry's property management company sent an email on day 4, 11 days late as always, about a leaking valve in the shop's radiator that nobody had reported leaking, and Nora spent 40 minutes on hold with a plumbing service before giving up and fixing it herself with a wrench Sol had kept in the drawer under the register for exactly this kind of emergency, because Barry's idea of urgent was still 6 weeks and a form filled out in triplicate, and some things simply couldn't wait that long. A woman came in on day 6 wanting to pawn her son's Little League trophy, gold-plated plastic worth maybe $4 in scrap, and cried when Nora had to tell her, gently, that there was nothing here worth lending against. Nora gave her 20 out of her own pocket instead, folded into the woman's hand like it was nothing, like it hadn't come out of the same $340 she still didn't have. For 9 days she told herself the envelope of cash, spent almost entirely, within a week, on back rent, a stove repair that finally got the front burner lighting again, and one good bag of dog food that made Mochi's coat go visibly glossier within days, had closed the book on the whole affair. She went to the diner. She let Deb pour her a coffee she couldn't quite afford and didn't say why her hand shook slightly around the mug. On the 10th day, a courier she'd never seen before set a manila folder on her counter without a word and left before the bell over the door finished ringing. Inside, a photograph of a bracelet, 18th century, allegedly, with a provenance letter attached bearing a signature Nora recognized on sight as almost certainly forged, and a check for $4,000 made out to her, already signed, no note. Rent was due again in 11 days. The stove's back burner had started clicking without lighting, again, some new failure in a different part. Mochi needed a dental cleaning the vet estimated at $600, an amount that existed, in Nora's mental ledger, in the same impossible category as a vacation or a car. The yellow notice on her apartment door had been joined, that same week, by a second one, slightly more formal, using the word arrears for the first time, a word she'd had to look up despite already knowing, with total certainty, exactly what it meant to her bank account. She looked at the check for a long time. She thought about the word Kessler had used. Silence. Not service. She thought about Barry's 11-day late emails, about furniture with a heartbeat, about the particular exhaustion of being looked through instead of at, 6 days a week, for 9 years. She deposited the check. He didn't come himself, the second time. He sent a car, black, quiet, driven by Gregor, who held the door and said Mr. Kessler would like your opinion on something, in the tone of a man requesting a second opinion on a roof leak, not a criminal enterprise. Gregor was somewhere in his 50s, built like a man who'd once boxed and now mostly drove, and he kept a peppermint tin in the glove box that he offered Nora without being asked, the first small kindness anyone connected to that world had extended her that didn't come wrapped in a folder full of her own personal information. He doesn't do this, Gregor said, at a red light, eyes on the mirror rather than on her. Bring people in twice. Most people, he uses once, pays them, forgets their face on purpose. You has called back 3 times in 11 days. Is that supposed to reassure me? I wouldn't know, Gregor said. I've worked for him 9 years. I've never once seen him call a person back 3 times. Maybe he just really likes old provenance letters. Maybe, Gregor said, in the tone of a man who did not believe that for 1 second and had decided, wisely, that it wasn't his business to say so out loud a second time. He offered her the peppermint tin again at the next light, and she took one this time, and neither of them spoke again until the marble floor of the auction house came into view through the windshield, gleaming under a chandelier that alone probably cost more than Nora had earned in her entire life behind pawnshop glass. The auction house was legitimate, real marble floor, real security guards who nodded at Gregor like they knew exactly whose money kept the lights on, and the item under dispute was a Faberge cigarette case, provenance disputed, ownership contested by 2 families with lawyers who'd been fighting for 6 years over a piece of enameled gold the size of a deck of cards. Both signatures on the provenance letters, Kessler said, Cedar and now, faintly, cigar smoke, standing beside her at a velvet rope table while 2 lawyers in identical navy suits glared at each other from opposite ends of the room. Only one can be real. Nora leaned close enough to see the pressure variance under the loop Gregor had produced from an inside pocket like it was something he always carried. Neither signature stuttered. Both were smooth, confident, unhurried. Neither of these is a forgery, she said, straightening. But this one, she tapped the older letter, was written with a fountain pen loaded with iron gall ink, which nobody's used commercially since the 1950s. And this 1-inch, the newer letter, glossier paper, used a rollerball. Rollerballs weren't mass market until the 60s. So if this letter claims to be from 1938, somebody's either lying about the date or lying about the pen, and either way, the second family's lawyer just built their whole case on a document that couldn't have existed when they say it did. The room went silent again, that particular silence Nora was beginning to recognize as her own personal sound effect. One lawyer's face went the color of the marble floor. Kessler didn't smile. She'd learn, over the following weeks, that he almost never smiled, but something in the set of his jaw eased, fractionally, the way a man's shoulders drop when a bet he wasn't sure about pays off exactly as hoped. That's a $200,000 sentence you just said out loud, Gregor murmured, mostly to himself. Afterward, in the car, Kessler didn't offer money. There's a man, he said instead, on my payroll for 11 years. Handles authentication for pieces that move through legitimate channels before they move through mine. I think he's skimming, underselling real pieces as fakes to a buyer he's got a side deal with, then splitting the difference. I can't prove it. I need someone who can look at his paperwork and tell me, honestly, whether I'm right. Why not just ask him? Because if I'm wrong, Kessler said, I don't want to have accused a man I've trusted for 11 years. And if I'm right, he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Nora thought about the check already spent on rent, on the stove, on a dog whose teeth were cleaner now than they'd been in 2 years. She thought about Barry in Scottsdale and his 11-day late emails. She thought about being furniture with a heartbeat. I look at paper, she said. That's all. I don't do anything with what I find. That's all I'm asking. It wasn't all he was asking. It never would be, not really, but she said yes anyway, because the alternative, going back to a counter where nobody spoke to her in full sentences, had started to feel, in a way she didn't examine too closely, like the more dangerous choice. The man's name was Felix Marchetti, though everyone in Kessler's orbit had shortened it, over the years, to simply Felix, the way certain names get worn smooth like river stones. His paperwork was, on its surface, immaculate. Nora spent for days in a converted warehouse loft that Kessler used as a storage and appraisal space, climate-controlled, humidity-monitored, smelling of acid-free tissue paper and the particular mineral cold of Volt steel, going through 11 years of provenance letters, sale receipts, appraisal notes, insurance riders, shipping manifests written in 3 languages. She found it on the 4th day. Not in the signatures. Felix was too careful for that, too experienced, a man who'd trained under 2 different masters in Antwerp before Kessler ever found him. In the dates. 6 pieces, across 4 years, each one appraised below market by Felix personally, each one sold within 90 days to the same shell buyer in Liechtenstein, each one resurfacing 18 months later at auction under a different provenance chain, at triple the price Kessler had been told it sold for. She laid it out on a light table, 6 folders in a row, date circled in red pencil, and Kessler stood over it for a long time without speaking. $240,000, he said finally. Not a question. Give or take, Nora said. I don't know where the rest went. I just know where it should have gone and didn't. Felix was summoned that evening to the warehouse under the pretense of a routine consignment review. He arrived at 6:50 p.m., 10 minutes early, the way a man arrives when he's spent 11 years building a reputation for never once being late, smelling faintly of the same pipe tobacco he'd smoked since Antwerp, a smell Nora would later learn he kept in a tin older than she was. He hung his coat on the same hook he'd hung it on for over a decade, straightened his cuffs, and asked Gregor, pleasantly, how his mother's hip surgery had gone, a question Gregor answered honestly before either of them understood what the evening actually was. Nora was asked to stay, not ordered, asked, which she noted, the way you note a change in weather, in a side room with a one-way mirror she hadn't known was a one-way mirror until Gregor mentioned, apologetically, that she probably shouldn't stand too close to the glass. She watched Felix's face when Kessler laid the 6 folders on the table between them, one at a time, date circled in red. Watched the exact moment a man's whole composed life came apart across his features, not shouting, not begging, just a slow, terrible stillness, the same stillness Kessler wore but wrong on him, borrowed, ill-fitting, a suit 2 sizes too large. Kessler didn't raise his voice. He never did. Take his passport, Kessler said to Anton, conversational, the way another man might ask for the salt. And his car. He can keep the apartment until the lease is up. I'm not a monster. It should have chilled her more than it did, the offhand mercy of it, the careful math of consequence measured out like a man portioning medication. What chilled her more, later, replaying it on the bus home, was how easily she'd understood the logic. How the 4 days of paperwork had made total, terrible sense to her the same way Sol's 41 years of teaching had once made a stuttering signature make sense. She was good at this. She hated, a little, how good. Kessler found her afterward in the side room, still watching the empty chair where Felix had sat, and for once he didn't lead with cedar and silence, he simply stood beside her, close but not touching, and let the quiet stretch until she was ready to break it herself. I need to know something, she said finally, not looking at him. When you say you're not a monster, do you actually believe that, or is it just the sentence you say so the rest of us can believe it? Both, Kessler said, after a moment. Most true things are both. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got that isn't a lie. I want rules, Nora said, turning to face him now, arms crossed, the particular posture of a woman negotiating from a position she knew was weaker than she wanted it to be and refusing to let that show in her voice. If I keep doing this, I don't want to be in the room when it happens. Whatever it is. I tell you what's true on the paper. What you do with that truth is yours, not mine. I don't watch. I don't get told afterward, either, unless I ask. You watched tonight. Tonight wasn't a rule yet. Tonight's why I'm making one. Kessler considered this for a long moment, the kind of consideration she'd come to recognize as genuine, not performed, the small tell of a man actually rearranging a private ledger rather than simply agreeing to make a problem go away. Fair, he said. You don't watch. You don't get told, unless you ask. In exchange, I need to know you'll still tell me the truth on the paper even when you already suspect what it's going to cost the person who wrote it. I already know that's the deal, Nora said. I signed on to that the night I said your forger stutters. That wasn't a job offer. That was you refusing to sign a false confession. Same muscle, she said. Different weight. Kessler almost laughed, a short exhale through the nose, gone before it fully formed, the closest thing to genuine amusement she'd seen cross his face in 3 months of watching for exactly that. You negotiate like a woman who spent 9 years talking desperate men out of pawning their wedding rings for less than they're worth. I negotiate like a woman who spent 9 years watching men like you decide, in real time, whether a person in front of them is worth more alive or more useful gone, Nora said. I just happen to notice which side of that math you keep landing on, with me. I'd like to keep it that way. Understood, Kessler said, and for once, there was no cedar-scented performance in it, no weather system stillness, just a man agreeing to terms the way he'd agree to terms with anyone whose judgment he'd learned, slowly, expensively, to trust. By midnight the air outside the warehouse smelled of river salt and diesel exhaust, the particular flat cold of a city waiting on weather that hadn't decided yet whether it would be rain or something worse. Kessler walked her to the car himself that night, which he hadn't done before, and neither of them spoke until Gregor had pulled away and the warehouse's single security light had shrunk to a dot in the side mirror. You should know, Kessler said, Felix isn't the only one who'll notice you're the reason he lost everything. Word travels in a family like mine. Slowly. But it travels. You're telling me this now. I'm telling you this so you can say no to what comes next with your eyes open, he said. Not so you'll say yes. She said yes anyway, 3 weeks later, to something bigger, a shipment, a buyer she'd never met, a document that needed authenticating in 11 minutes flat in the back room of a shipping container yard in Red Hook that smelled of low tide and rust and, underneath it, faintly, gasoline. The buyer was a man named Costas, representing a consortium out of Piraeus who wanted to move $60 million worth of pre-Columbian artifacts through a single afternoon transaction, no questions, no customs stamp anyone could trace. Kessler's cut alone was 7 figures. The whole deal rested on a single certificate of authenticity for the collection centerpiece, a gold funerary mask that Costas's own expert had already flagged, quietly, as possibly fake, a whisper that had reached Kessler's ear 40 minutes before the meeting and had put him, for the first time Nora had witnessed, visibly on edge. Gregor had driven her out to Red Hook that morning without explaining where they were going, only that Kessler needed her eyes, not her opinions, a distinction she didn't fully understand until she stood inside a shipping container lined with foam crating and understood exactly how much weight had been placed on a single pair of hands. 6 men stood at intervals along the container's length, not looking at each other, not looking at her, each one positioned the exact careful distance from Kessler that told her, without anyone saying so, how badly this particular morning could go wrong. Costas arrived in a car with diplomatic plates that meant nothing legally but bought him 40 extra seconds of nobody searching the trunk. He smelled of clove cigarettes and salt water taffy, an odd, almost childish sweetness underneath the tobacco, and he shook Kessler's hand with both of his own, warmly, the way men do right before they ruin each other over money. If it's fake, Kessler said, low, in the container yard's cold wind, cedar barely holding against the diesel and the salt. Once Costas had stepped away to inspect the crating himself, Costas walks, and word gets out I tried to sell him a lie. That's not a bad afternoon. That's the end of 11 years of relationships I can't rebuild. Men like Costas don't forgive being embarrassed. They forgive being robbed before they forgive being embarrassed. 11:04 a.m. 11 minutes. The mask itself smelled faintly of the cedar shavings it had been packed in for shipping, an accident of proximity that made Nora think, absurdly, of Kessler standing 3 feet behind her, and she filed the thought away to examine later, in a quieter room, with fewer men watching her hands. Up close the gold had the particular soft, buttery sheen of true antiquity, nothing modern replicated that exact glow, not convincingly, not under raking light, and for one full breath she let herself simply look at it as a piece of history rather than as $60 million balanced on the end of a loop. Nora examined the mask under a jewelless loop borrowed from Gregor's coat, turning it slowly under a battery lamp that threw more shadow than light, aware of Costas's own expert, a thin, nervous man named Delucci, watching her every movement like a man watching a coin flip he'd already bet on. 10 minutes. 9. The container's metal walls held the cold in like a refrigerator, and somewhere outside a gull screamed twice over the water, and still nobody in that container so much as shifted their weight. The gold was right. The weight was right. But the tool marks along the inner rim, magnified, showed a rotary engraving pattern. "This piece is real," Nora said, straightening, "but somebody's added to it. There's modern rotary tool work along this inner edge, repair work, not forgery, probably done 40, 50 years ago to stabilize a crack that would have otherwise split the mask in half. Whoever told you it's fake saw the tool marks and assumed forgery instead of restoration. It's not fake. It's just been fixed, badly, by someone who didn't want anyone to notice." DeLucci's face did something complicated, a flicker, quick, gone almost before it landed, the specific micro-collapse of a man who has just watched a bet he'd already spent the winnings on turn to nothing in his hand. Costas laughed, once, short and sharp, and clapped Kessler on the shoulder like old friends reunited, and called for someone to bring the crating team back in to finish the count, and for 4 full minutes nobody in that container thought about DeLucci at all except Nora, who was still watching him the way she watched a signature she hadn't finished reading yet. Afterward, DeLucci lingered by the container door, and something in the way he refused to meet Nora's eyes made the hair on her arms rise before her mind caught up to why. "He's the one who started the fake rumor," she said quietly to Kessler, once Costas's car had pulled out of the yard. He didn't misjudge the tool marks. He knew exactly what they were. He wanted the deal to fall apart. Why? Because if it falls apart at the last minute, in front of Costas, it's not Costas's money at risk. It's yours. He wanted you humiliated in front of the one buyer whose respect you can't afford to lose. That's not incompetence. That's somebody working for someone who wants your reputation gone before they take anything else. Kessler went very still, the stillness she now recognized the way other people recognized a change in a familiar person's breathing. "Rival family," he said. "Not a question." "I don't know whose," Nora said. "I just know what I saw in his face when the mask turned out real. He wasn't relieved you were safe. He was disappointed." 3 days later, DeLucci's employment with Costas's consortium ended, quietly, the details of which Kessler never shared with Nora and she never asked to hear. What she did hear, secondhand, from Gregor, who mentioned it the way you'd mention a change in the weather, was that Costas himself had made the call, not Kessler, that the consortium didn't take kindly to a man who'd tried to cost them a $60 million relationship over a grudge nobody upstream had authorized. It was, Gregor said, almost admiringly, the cleanest kind of consequence, the kind a man never has to order because somebody else's math arrives at the same number first. "Doesn't that bother you?" Nora asked him, once, in the car back from Red Hook, salt air still clinging to both their coats. "That you didn't have to do anything. That it just happened." "Everything happens because somebody did something," Kessler said, watching the water slide by out the window. "I just don't always have to be the one holding the knife for the math to come out even." 3 weeks after that, past midnight, Kessler found her still at the light table in the warehouse loft, running her thumb along the edge of a 19th-century ledger someone had brought in for authentication, the kind of quiet work she did now 2, sometimes 3 nights a week, paid in cash that had a habit of arriving in amounts exactly, uncannily, calibrated to whatever bill was due that month. He set 2 glasses down without asking if she wanted one. Poured something amber that smelled, even from across the table, like it cost more than her monthly rent used to. "You never asked what happened to the confession," he said. "Bosco's." She hadn't. She'd told herself she didn't want to know. "Grand jury didn't indict him," Kessler said. "Didn't have enough without it. He's driving a produce truck in Ohio now. Doesn't know how close he came to a cell he'd never have gotten out of. Does he know I'm the reason?" "No one knows that but the people in that room," Kessler said. "And I keep those people close." Nora turned her glass without drinking from it. "That's supposed to be comforting." "It's supposed to be true," he said. She looked at him then, really looked, the way she looked at a signature under a loop, for the hitch, the stutter, the place where the performance and the person underneath stopped lining up. She didn't find one. That was, somehow, worse. You could have killed me that night, she said. In the shop. That's the part one keep landing on. 3 men, a folder with my mother's address in it, and I told you your 6-hour emergency was garbage, to your face, and you didn't kill me. No. Why not? Kessler was quiet long enough that the warehouse's old radiator ticked twice in the silence, an old building sound, ordinary, absurd against the size of the question sitting between them. Because I've had 11 people lie to me, well, he said. You're the first person in longer than I can remember who told me something true when it would have been safer to lie. He reached across the table, slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to pull back, and touched 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist, where a fading yellow-green bruise still marked the spot Anton's grip had left 3 weeks earlier. His hand was warm. Warmer than she'd expected, from a man built out of quiet the way he was. This still hurts, he asked. Not anymore, she said, which wasn't entirely true, and they both seemed to know it, and neither of them said so. My father ran a scrapyard in Brighton Beach, he said, not moving his hand. I grew up smelling rust and diesel. I used to think if I got far enough from that smell, I'd stop being the kid who slept in a car 3 winters running. He turned her wrist slightly, not possessive, just close, the way you turn a document toward better light. I never got far enough. I just learned better cologne. I sleep for blocks from a chicken processing plant, Nora said. Some nights the whole apartment smells like boiled feathers. I used to think if I got a better job, I'd stop noticing. A pause. You don't stop noticing. You just start noticing other things instead. Like what? Like the fact you've been holding my wrist for 2 minutes and haven't once looked down to check, Nora said. Most people check. Like they need to see it to believe they're doing it. I don't need to see it, Kessler said, to know exactly what I'm doing. That's either very romantic or extremely unsettling, Nora said. I haven't decided which. You've had 3 months to decide. I do math for a living. Some equations take longer than others to balance. Can it be both? It's usually both, with you, she said, and something in her own voice surprised her, softer than she'd meant it, less armored than 9 years behind pawnshop glass should have left her capable of. That's the part one can't get a read on. Everyone else I've ever met, I can find the seam eventually. The place where the story they're telling and the person underneath stop matching up. I've been looking for yours for 3 months. Found it yet? No, she admitted. And I don't know if that means you don't have one, or if it means you're just better at this than anyone I've ever tested. Maybe, Kessler said, it means I stopped telling the story a long time ago. Nothing to catch if there's nothing being performed. Everybody performs something. Then tell me what I'm performing right now. Nora looked at him for a long moment, at the 2 fingers still resting against the soft skin of her wrist, at the exact, deliberate stillness of a man who had built an entire empire on never once giving anything away for free. I don't know yet, she said, finally, honestly. But I intend to find out. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The radiator ticked a 3rd time. Somewhere below, a delivery truck downshifted on Avenue U, ordinary city noise leaking up through old brick, and it was almost enough to break whatever had settled over the table between them, almost, but not quite, because his thumb moved once, slow, along the inside of her wrist, and her pulse answered it before her mind had finished deciding whether it should. I should go, she said, and didn't move. You should, he agreed, and didn't let go. Mochi needs her 2nd dental appointment Thursday, she said, finally standing, pulling her hand back gently, gathering her coat, her voice deliberately, almost comically ordinary against everything that had just not quite happened in the room. The vet said if I miss the window, we're back to square one and I am not explaining to a 14-pound terrier why she has to get put under again. Kessler almost smiled. Almost. Take the car Thursday, he said. Gregor will drive you. I'll take the bus, Nora said, already at the door. Some things a girl's gotta keep for herself. She was 3 steps down the warehouse stairwell, cedar and radiator heat fading behind her, boiled feathers and Knapp Street waiting for blocks ahead, when her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket, an unknown number, a single text, no name attached. Felix knows where you live. He's not driving a produce truck. He never left the city. She stood very still on the stairs, the way she'd stood still in the shop 11 weeks before, the way you stand still when the ground has just quietly, without warning, tilted 6 inches to the left. She thought, absurdly, of Mochi, asleep right now for blocks from a plant that smelled of boiled feathers, curled on a blanket that had cost $3 at a stoop sale, utterly unaware that the woman who fed her dented concubine had spent the last 3 months learning to read forged signatures for a man whose empire ran on exactly the kind of silence Nora had once thought she was only being paid to keep. She thought of the wedding ring woman, the $60 out of a register that wasn't technically hers to be generous with. She thought of Mr. Okafor's pocket watch, reclaimed for the 12th time now, and whether she'd even still be behind that counter to see it. She thought of $340, a number that used to be the whole shape of her fear, now so small in her hand it barely registered as weight at all, and how strange it was, how the fear hadn't gone anywhere, it had just found a bigger number to live inside. Behind her, upstairs, she could hear Kessler's low voice on a call she hadn't heard start, saying a name she didn't recognize, in a tone she recognized immediately. The tone of a man about to go very, very quiet. She put the phone back in her pocket without answering it. Some things, she'd learned, you didn't text back right away. You let the silence sit a moment first, and you listened, very carefully, to what was moving underneath it. That's the story so far, a broke pawnshop clerk who could read a lie in the shake of a stranger's hand, and a man who'd built an empire on never being read at all, now circling each other in a house neither of them fully trusts. Nora Vance and Dimitri Kessler both know the smart move is to walk away before the wrist touch becomes something neither of them can take back, and neither of them is walking. So what do you think? Does Felix make his move before Kessler gets to him first? And does Nora run, or does she finally stop pretending she isn't already in too deep? Drop your predictions in the comments, and if you want to see how this one ends, like this video, share it with someone who loves a slow burn, and subscribe with the bell on for the next chapter.